Hey, good morning, everybody. It's good to be back. So I'm Gary Brudvig, and I'm planning to lead a seminar titled Energy, Past, Present, and Future. This will be my 10th seminar for the Institute, and it's good to see so many familiar faces and also a lot of new faces. Look forward to leading a seminar this summer on energy. Again, I've done this in the past, various aspects, and it's going to be a science focus seminar, but we're going to talk about a little bit of the history as well as environmental impacts. It's interesting. We heard from Tim about the environmental impacts on society. Of course, that's from technology and particularly energy use. This always in our news that now energy is, I would say, an existential crisis right now, global warming and the impacts of energy use. We've got to transform our energy technology. And so I wanted to, in this seminar, talk a little bit about the history, how we got to where we are now, what our current energy uses are, and what can we do in the future to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, and what would be the possible sources of energy that could replace them. So I start a little bit with the history. We'll talk in the seminar a bit about, where did fossil fuels come from in the first place, and how are they formed? They actually are, I would say, stored solar energy. They came from plants that were buried in the ground millions or even longer ago, that have been transformed chemically to form, petroleum, coal, natural gas that we use. So some of you may know that Yale played a significant role in the dawn of the petroleum age. So just go back in history, and we'll talk a little bit about this. And in the mid-1850s, there was an energy crisis. Any of you know what that energy crisis was in the mid-1850s? Some of those people who, like Zach, took my seminar will raise your hand before. So we were using whale oil to light our homes and burning whale oil, and the whales were being hunted to extinction or near extinction. And there was a crisis. How are we going to light our homes at night if we don't have whale oil? Benjamin Silliman Jr., a professor of science here at Yale, was asked to write a report on the potential uses of petroleum. That led to a report which was issued, which he submitted in 1855. It led to the drilling of the first oil well in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and the dawn of the petroleum age. So, Yale has perhaps played a role of where we are today. I hope we can play a role to not the age of petroleum, but the age of renewables in the future. But we'll talk a little bit about the Silliman report. One of the interesting aspects of the Silliman report is he used a technique invented by his father, Benjamin Silliman Sr., who was the very first professor of science here at Yale. He started in 1802, and he invented a technique called fractional distillation. Some of you may know that. That's how you make ethanol from fermented sugar, is to distill the alcohol, and it comes off, of course, it boils earlier. So he used that to make a fraction of petroleum called kerosene, and it showed that it burns in lamps just as good as whale oil, and solved the whale crisis, or at least helped to minimize it. So we'll talk a bit about that, and how the petroleum age began, where we are today. We'll talk a bit about the current sources of energy. We mostly are fossil fuels, but there's a growing use of renewables like solar and wind. We'll talk about some of the challenges and maybe a little bit of the political efforts to downplay this. So we hear a lot about, we can't have windmills because they kill all the birds. Well, do you know what most significant lethal threat for birds is? It's not. Striking buildings is one of them, but that's not number one.
Cars.
Huh?
Cars?
No. Cats. Cats kill 10 times more birds than any other source, and windmills do not make a significant contribution. So we'll talk a bit about the subterfuge to try to minimize that. We hear a lot about these things. It's not an issue, really, a significant issue, but you ask the question, what about the environmental impacts of burning fossil fuels? We heard about that from Tim in the art world. It's just enormous. Not only tire sitting by the shoreline in New York City, but we have global warming crisis with temperature rise, severe storms, floods, so on. This is going to get worse, and this is something we need to really address, and we'll talk a bit about that. Then going forward in the future, how are we going to change our energy use? And there's some real challenges. For example, solar and wind are great, but it's not always sunny out and it's not always windy out. And so how do you use those to completely power our planet? At night, if it's not windy and it's not sunny, well, what do? Yeah, well, you can't just not have your power. So how do you do that? Well, the key is storage. You have to be able to store solar and wind, but they are right now, photovoltaics and windmills are making electricity, which is instantaneous. So electricity has to be stored somehow. So do you know what the most significant way to store wind and solar electricity is right now? You might say batteries. Not even close to important. More than 90% of the storage is by pumping water uphill. So pumped hydro. And in fact, there are huge installations to do this, but it's not very practical. If you want to put solar panels on your roof, you're not going to make a dam in your backyard and pump water uphill to store the electricity so you can have some at night. So this is an issue, and so how can you store it? Nature produced the fossil fuels, and we've stored the solar energy for millions of years. It lasts for essentially indefinitely. Can we replicate that? We'll talk a bit about how we might be able to do that. So that's a little bit of the kind of thing, flavors, energy, past, present, and future we'll talk about. It's going to be a science-focused seminar, and as I've done in the past, it will include a lot of hands-on activities, which I think is essential for doing science, teaching science. But also we'll talk a bit about other aspects, the political aspects, historical aspects. The seminar, of course, would be appropriate for anyone teaching science, particularly chemistry or physics or technology. But I think it would probably be especially good for example, elementary school teachers who might not teach only science, but teach all of the other aspects related to society, political, economic issues. That we'll touch on all of those a bit in the seminar. So that's my plan, and good to be back. And then I look forward to working with some of you this summer.